This is Morning Express on this 11th day of May 2016. It's time for the newsroom. I'll go straight to introducing the panel that we have this morning. And joining me is to my extreme left, we have Victor Bwire, who is the Deputy for Media Council of Kenya. Thank you for coming and good to have you.
Pleasure.
We have Muganda, who is an editor with The Standard. Great to have you as well. Dr. Nancy Buka is somewhere stuck in traffic. Hopefully she'll join us as we go along. But if not, we'll continue with the conversation anyway. But let's start with some of the stories that has been making headlines. And of course, one that has been there since towards the end of last week is the assassination of Jacob Juma, a very controversial businessman. And let me first hear from you, Victor, on how the story so far has been covered, how we have brought out the story.
Thank you, Mike. One, it was an important story that could not be ignored. But two, it started off on a very speculative reporting mode. And there was too much speculation. At some stage you'd think it's fiction, not journalism. And for quite some time, even basic questions were not asked. And we went on a reportorial approach. We were just saying according, even simple, small questions that would be asked at that level were not. So it's picking up, it's improving, obviously as information, as people get more information, but from the word go, from that day, it was a very speculative reporting, and at some stage it fell below our own expectations.
Would that be as a result of the fact that, it's a story that's just happened, so really you're just reporting, as opposed to, beginning to ask questions?
Well, that will pass, but when you look at even the sourcing and the accounts, the way they are reported, it was purely just like the way we pick information from online and report. And issues like verification of basic facts of journalism were missing from the initial stories. You would see if, for example, the first day, if they're saying police saw people with border or motorbikes, and at the same time they are saying nobody was at a scene of crime. So how did then these people see this border rise or the vehicles they were claiming? So such basic questions will
like, okay, but what about the bullet?
The
cartridge, yes, the bullet has to leave the gun. So I think we messed it up. Either we messed it up because we decided to go with the police story, or we messed it up because we just we wanted to think with our fingers and not think with our heads.
Okay, and of course, Dennis Onserigo, an investigative reporter, has gone in depth and looked at some of those stories, and I'd just like us to run a little bit of what possibly he has run and some of the questions that he has raised, albeit later.
The 45-year-old businessman Jacob Juma prophesied about his death, saw it coming but did not manage to stop it. He walked right into a trap that appears to have been well planned and neatly executed. Friday 9:30 p.m., police officers at Karen police station receive a report of a shooting incident within Lenana area. Officers arriving at the scene discover the body of Jacob Juma. Jacob was not slumped on the steering wheel but lying to his left. The businessman was dead.
And of course, that is the lead, and of course the full story, I'm sure you've either watched it. If you haven't, then I'm sure at some point we will rerun it. But coming to you, Victor, and just looking at sometimes the language that we use, the media is the watchdog for the society and the community, but sometimes it feels like we are more against the government, and even the approach is the more controversial against the government, the more we feel like we're doing our job.
Well, there are people who are stuck on the traditional adversarial relationship between media and the government, and it's historical and it's not unique to Kenya. It's a global phenomenon. But sometimes I think we go overboard, because if, for example, like Clay mentioned, the language, who say at that level, who knew it's a murder, killing, you know, so that sometimes, and again, as we ask, at that level, in fact, police sometimes make government appear bad, where even because of the way they manage and manage information flow and communication. Because at that level, it might have been like they're saying either government or the assassin or whatever it is. But why would the police take it the responsibility to start lying, to start imagining that they were on the scene of crime when they were not there? You know, so why did they take on the responsibility to start creating a lie? Now they are, once people criticize what they have done, they put there some section of evidence or what will appear like evidence, and in that sense they make government appear like it was involved, yet at this level we don't know. Maybe investigation would reveal whatever might have happened, but I think sometimes we shouldn't just continue everything that happens. If a vehicle gets an accident, then we must blame government. Sometimes there are individuals that must take responsibility outside government, because when we get stuck with government, and I've asked my media colleagues many times that when you lump government to blame for rains or for El Nino, then you are failing to identify institutions that are, if it's the meteorological department, if the department of disaster, they are individuals. So to me, sometimes let's break down things and say this is so and so. If it's police, it's police. If it's current police, it's current police. It's not government. I mean, as such, yes, in terms of our stories, a big story is government, you are blaming government. But there must be an individual officer, an individual station that was involved in some of these things. So yes, let's watchdog, yes, but let's also make an effort. And we mentioned yesterday informal when I was talking to you, the issue of sourcing. Where do we blame? Where do we put, when we are criticizing or when we are watchdogging, how do we isolate? Because at the end of the day, we must do stories that at the end of the day, I ask myself, I did this story, so what happened? I mentioned Mike, and KTN has changed.
And then what? Yes.
But if I just say standard group, then I remain blaming standard group. Sometimes we don't get to the root of what happened. So we need to do more than just looking at government as a block and start doing individual accountability, because that's where we can make change. To me, that's what I believe, that we need to identify and isolate issues and place issues where blame is. If it's Victor at the Media Council, who messed? It's Victor. But if we just take that Media Council has messed, Media Council has not done, sometimes institutions, people just go around and play around. Because
it becomes very difficult to actually blame a whole institution, because that just disappears within.
Yes, so we need to be a bit specific and precise in what we are doing.
Okay, fine. When it comes to blaming the government, and this is something I've always said on this show a number of times, is that the government is the only institution that is guilty until it proves itself innocent. You know, and anytime you start an instance with the government, it is guilty. It is up to its duty for a journalist. That's why Because if you don't treat it that way, then actually you'll end up swallowing the government's bait all the time. Because, okay, fine, even if you call it in Swahili, Sirikali, that is basically, the aim is always to subvert. There's no time that any government in the world is just going to sit there and tell you like, okay, fine, come for the truth and all that. And that's why actually I think we've been fighting for this law of freedom of access to information. Because for a very long time, these guys have not been, the successive governments have not been coming forth with information. So that's why it has actually taken this long for this law this thing to be passed. You see, so I think it's not about adversarial, but at the same time, yes, we need to coexist. But at the same time, I think being in bed with the government, because at some point I remember I writing that actually the Kenyan media is not actually in bed with the government in as much as the government invited it to bed, but the Kenyan media actually called the government like, okay, fine, here we're in bed, come, yes, So sometimes it's not about a war, but actually it's just about because when you come too cozy with the government, then you find it very difficult to ask the hard questions.
It's definitely not in our place to be cozy with the government, because at the end of the day, we are the watch. We're meant to be neutral and just give the questions. But is it our job to blame, or is it our job to highlight and say, look, there is this question, why aren't the police doing this? Why is the CID doing this?
But the thing is, what happens like in Kenya is that the government actually makes it very, very hard for us to get that kind of information, because like in this particular case, this is not the executive, the police service falls under the executive. I think it falls under the executive, and the first thing that these guys did was to start actually fumbling and mumbling. Then you start suspecting them like, okay, fine, so how do you know all this? When you try to ask questions, the first thing that comes from the police service is like, if you have any more information, you bring it to us. How are we supposed to have that? And actually we are relying on information that you're giving us, and we feel that this information is not enough. You see, so give us some more information, shed some more light. But when we ask that, the government the executive, or that is the police service, comes across as very belligerent, very combative. You see, so it makes our work a little bit difficult, and then people tend to think like, oh, we're always fighting with the government. There's a lot that has been said about this gentleman's death, so much, because of the tweets he used to post, the people used to mention and all that. But you see, nobody ever came forward. This is basic question. Nobody ever came forward to deny any of these people he used to mention in his posts. Nobody ever came forward to deny, and none of us actually has taken the initiative to go to this gentleman. This guy always used to mention you're the spokesman in the DP's office, you were mentioned, you're a journalist in another media house, this guy mentioned. We have actually not taken initiative ourselves to ask our own colleagues
what they have to say about
this guy,
or their comments to some of the allegations.
We have not even taken that initiative.
Okay, Victor, in terms of turnaround time, because one of the things you've said, facts are coming out now, and the media is, when we look at the papers and even some of the investigative pieces that are coming out, there are those questions now being asked. But are we slow on our turnaround time, such that we should have been asking these questions on day 1 or day 2, or even at the scene, the minute it was reported that he's dead? This should have been the questions that would have come out immediately.
One of the for 2 years I reported as a crime reporter, and what increasingly is coming out, that most of our crime and security investigative reporters know the government or government spokesperson friends at personal level, and they depend so much on informal information more than the formal information. And two, you will see that even on that day or the following day, there was so much information most of our crime reporters or security had unofficially, so that then that compromises your ability now to ask hard questions. You start really kupatia habari. So sometimes you are struggling.
And it was given in an informal setup.
In a very informal. You can't quote anybody. You can't ask the friend tough questions, and that now increasingly is compromising the ability for journalists to ask hard questions that Clay is mentioning, because now we have given you information. I mean, that's what you are made to believe.
Right.
But they will give you very selective information for a particular reason, and we fall in that trap. And that's why we are seeing very reportorial approach to reporting. While it's good, and we have encouraged that collaboration, media security dialogues, people should understand it. But when it's done too much and we informalize so much, it's compromising the ability of journalists. I can tell you, I talked about 6 or 5 crime reporters that night, and people had so much information from informal sources, from the informal sources,
but you see,
that more than informal.
Yeah,
so
and
that compromised what they were reporting.
Yeah, but you see what is this is the reason why I keep on, again, you could say that blaming the government per se, as it were. It's because they make it so very difficult, because if at all the police service or current police or the actually had a formal press conference or press briefing and talked to journalists and told them, okay, fine, now you can ask all the questions. But you see, they never did that. The first thing they did was to give us this information. Then we started poking holes. I mean, 2-3 days later, whatever I was talking about, that actually the mistakes we made them on the first or the second day. But 2-3-4 days later,
recovered.
Yes, and I think like some of the things that the questions like people like on Sarigo asked on Sunday and Moha and all, those are some of the questions that actually we should have been asking on the first day. So
if there was a forum.
If there was a forum. But you see, they never gave us this forum. Or they could have said, okay, fine, this businessman, we found him dead at this particular place. We suspect he was killed. Okay, fine. We will have a press briefing at maybe 10, at 4 and all that, and then we have a chance to ask all these questions. The problem is that, and I keep on saying, is that this particular government, which actually I thought, or rather this particular administration, which I thought like, okay, fine, we have moved from this older generation guys. I mean, we had Moi, then we had Kibaki. Now we're having these young guys actually who know how, this is the information age. The biggest problem is that these guys actually are the worst when it comes to managing information. The biggest problem with this government is poor communication. They bungle every single thing. I mean, poor communication. The cops, we don't know. Who is the police spokesman? This guy, I think Mr. Wynne or something like that.
Charles is the deputy.
Charles is the deputy.
The national police is Kinoti, and Charles Owino is the deputy.
He's the deputy. This is the guy we see most of the time. There was a time he was not there. There was a lot of bungling, the police service and all that. We've never known like who is the official spokesperson. At what point should the police service actually be having maybe weekly or monthly briefings instead of actually just talking to their friends, as you're saying? Should they be having so that they give us a state of crime or whatever it is that actually whatever they're working on to change things and stuff? I mean, the managing information and actually communication has been the biggest letdown, or rather most of the problems that we're facing now is because of that.
Okay.
You see, and that's why we end up with this half-baked, pieces of information from my friend in the government, from my friend in the police service.
Sources.
Yes, which are very
sources
that do not want to be quoted.
Yes. So you have a story, you write a story, you have a crime reporter writing a story which is like 600 words and there is not a single name
that you can quote.
There's no name that actually, as a police officer close to the investigation, could not say this. So they've made it very, very hard for actually the media, and I think also we are falling into that trap.
Okay, Victor, according to the rules that govern some of the stories that should be written, especially stories like this that are very sensitive and obviously have many more questions than answers, in terms of going to press so quickly and releasing this story, because again it has a time frame that it needs to be done within, but then we don't have sources that we can quote or sources that we can say so and so has authoritatively said this is the position of the police. Does that injure the credibility of the reports that we're giving?
Sure. And one of the things that I was mentioning to you last time is that we must change. We cannot continue reporting as it were during that time. There was so much information online. Two, in sense of discussing, this a major story has happened. Who does what? There were family sources. There were other sources, there were friends, there were other people he has mentioned. So the justification for doing purely a full story of 600 words without a single source sometimes beats the whole logic of journalism, and that's why how journalism is different from fiction writing, from other writing,
and from anything that's written on social media.
We must try. Yes, it's such a challenge, like you are saying, but we must strive. That's why we are journalists. That's why journalists work 24 hours. That's why journalists are not literature guys, linguists. So the reason of breaking news stories, and I mean a lot, because most of our crime reporters or business desks, or news desks, have sources. I can tell you. I mean, there are resources here. They have sources, and if they meant to get, and they have done it many times, they will get sources. So because such a huge story, when it goes like fiction, it erodes, and sometimes we might be playing just in the hands of whoever wanted to plan that thing, because that's how he wants us to get that story, so that we move away. Because right now there's already AK-47 something.
The rifle that was used, these cartridges that were found.
Yes. And sometimes we saw those stories when we were in newsrooms, where stories would come from National State Intelligence, and you have those stories that have no basis, has no byline, has nothing, just so and so reporter, and sometimes that story meant just to gauge public mood. And sometimes, so that's why whoever that might have just done what and wanted the journalists to do exactly what they are doing. So I think they need to be cautioned that while the breaking, the urgency of the story is a must, but there were basic small information like Clay mentioned. There were already people the late had mentioned, either truly or not truly, but he had mentioned. Was there an effort, for example, to get a comment from such people? Or was there an effort to get a comment from the family, for example? Because we can't assume that family never knew, have no clue. They knew how he dressed in the morning, how he left. You know, that basic
what
small
conversation
things,
he probably had.
And I think this is also sometimes where we make the mistake, is that most of the time we start thinking with our hearts and not our heads, as journalists, because I'm very sure it could have been if at all any of us, the media, actually any journalist went probably to interview Mrs. Juma. People could have said, she's still grieving, how insensitive. But you just need to know, what is going on. Because ideally, in most, and I'm sorry to say this, in most developed countries, is that any time a husband dies, in a homicide, the first suspect is the spouse. When a man dies, the first suspect is the wife. When a wife dies,
where do we draw the line? Because again, we cannot be so insensitive to a point where she's also receiving the information.
Yes, that is what you are told. That is what you are told, that she also received the information in the morning. We did not ask her at what point did he receive this information. We've not asked
which number called the police current to give that. Who reported that?
You see, all these things we've been told about. And I think what is happening is I actually don't know basically how this guy was killed right now. From where I'm sitting, I still don't know, because of,
as a journalist you cannot authoritatively say.
I cannot, yes, because everything that we have is what the police are feeding us. And I think for this particular case, if journalists make any mistake about reporting this case, I think you need to blame the authorities. They actually misled us, probably deliberately, or because of incompetence, or just because they don't know how to lie.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the many times I reported crime, the many times. Now an AK-47 has resurfaced. I can tell you for sure, one day, one time, the ballistic expert comes out, or it will be different. That gun or an AK-47 might not have never been involved in that death. So that now,
and they can prove that through the holes, the dust that is there.
And once that is done, it messes up with the whole case. Because once the ballistic expert shows that the gun used and is now an AK-47 is on the scene of crime, that already makes it difficult even for the investigation. So the rush to pick stories the way we are being fed, without asking difficult questions, we are playing, and that's why in many cases most of those matters are never, because you will find most of the information that we are being given, we continue lying, and people pick up. Now politicians have already picked up, they are already mentioning everybody who was supposed to have killed and what. Now how does then that vary with factual information maybe the police will get?
Clay, you bring in an interesting aspect there, and I want to quote one of the articles that we have today, where Moses Wetangula has said he will name, apparently, the killers of Jacob Juma during the funeral. And as the media, we need obviously to make sure that we don't get sucked into the politics of this, because evidently anybody could take this depending on what they want, what agenda they want to push across, to their advantage, and politics can play into it?
Actually, that is what is happening. Is that the same thing? I mean, because we never got this information the way probably from the credible source, and I think there's a lot of distrust between the media and the police, or just between Kenyans and the police. So here is a case where we have all these politicians running with whatever it is. I am very sure we will report. This is what Wetangula said. I mean, if probably what we should have asked, we should ask Wetangula is fine. Why don't you just say it now? Name them now.
And why not go
to the police?
Why don't you take this whatever to the police, because the police is looking for information? Why can't you name them now? So you see, the politicians have gotten sucked into this thing. Now we are actually getting into it, but it's also because, let me call it, the government side, they also started, like, if you say like, oh, Jacob Juma was killed, or somebody tells you like, did you see that? And we already said this infighting on social media, where the other day there was, I think, a hashtag, oh, Kabetes was not a saint. And I mean, nobody ever said that he's a saint. What people are talking about is, come on, this guy was killed under suspicious circumstances. Now, they're the government side, or people who actually feel like you are attacking the government, for the wrong reason. And then there's also the politicians now, like the Wetangula, who actually feel like, okay, fine, actually we are being targeted for the wrong reason, so we have to throw stones at the government. He is going to name these people. Why can't he name them now when actually investigations are going on?
That's where now I'm asking the question, as the media, should we even be reporting that he said he's going to name? Or should we even be asking him, listen, you say you're going to name, then put the report and say he...
Yes, the thing is, we're actually going to report, because right now, if I am to go to Wetangula and ask Wetangula, why can't you name them now? The rhetoric I'm going to get is, why didn't you ask the police these questions? Why are you now asking the government, the opposition, these hard questions, while you could not ask the government these hard questions? So it becomes that thing of back and forth. They've already created a rift, so here we are caught in the middle.
And what,
because of the mistakes probably we made at the beginning.
And what that does is that the Chinese films, is that how does Juma's family, the children, the rest of them, look at whoever will be named, whether it's factual and unfactual. You are creating a permanent, because if once they say it's so and so, how does Juma's family, children, and look at that person, even in a later life? So one day, one time, you hear those revenge missions, because you have grown feeling, you are told that so and so killed Victor. And
despite the fact that there may be no facts.
Yes.
It, yeah.
So that's why, like you are mentioning, we need to be cautious a bit, and a bit more responsible, especially when it involves there's such things like murders, families, terrorists, and whatever. Because the same thing you are mentioning is what is happening largely at the coastal town.
Yeah, and we have to remember that
victims,
actually, these politicians, these ones, actually they're the ones who were in the previous governments, eh? So actually,
they know how the system works.
Yes, they know how the system works. So actually right now, because he's out, he'll say this. But actually, let's say next month, if he's in, he'll actually be
totally different story.
Totally different story.
Because I covered
all of them. They should not be believed.
I covered for some time the Mungiki things when I was still reporting crime, and what was happening at that time, you saw there were a lot of police killings by suspected Mungiki, by suspected whatever. They were killing police, because what the police would do is, once that happens, they would come on air and say how my boys were reacting to you, whatever they killed. And you see the police, the operational police officers are being shown on TV, their faces and the rest. Then they are compromising their security. Now the criminals know police by face, the police don't know criminals by. So when an officer is just doing his social life, he's shot, and you have seen that in Kayole, you have done that alone. So that's the risk we are doing, and that is happening at the coast, like I mentioned. We bring, yes, victims of terrorist suspects, and we paraded them. Now, obviously, either the security agency or whoever involved has already known this is a person who is supposed to be a witness. And you see now these secret disappearances and killings. So we need, as journalists, we need to be a bit cautious and sensitive that yes, we have a responsibility to do this, but at what level do we disclose which information and which faces and which witnesses?
Okay, Clay, maybe just on concluding on this particular investigation, what is it that you'd want to see between now and possibly, say, the next few days that we should be doing as a media?
I think we need to ask the police more questions, or rather the authorities, let me put it that way, because like the other day during the post-mortem, there was this police officer who came forward and said that he wanted to do as people call it, alcohol test on the day to find out probably if this gentleman was drunk, and that's why he could not drive. So you see, they've been fumbling and bumbling all through, and I think what we need to do is we need to forget about the politicians, what they're going to say. Yes, those ones can be reported as whatever, so-and-so said this. But I think the people who actually should hold account, or the people who should be asking the hard questions, are actually the police officers. The police those officers. Are the authorities, because at the end of the day, whichever report is going to come, it's not going to come from the politicians, it's not going to come from a political party, it's going to come from the police officers. But you see, also going forward, I think the police need to build trust, you know. They need to be in such a situation that when police say something, we don't start speculating. You don't give us information and then the next thing you tell us, okay, so-and-so we found so-and-so killed, and then the next statement is, don't speculate, you know. By telling us that, you're already telling us, like, okay, fine, start speculating. It's like another window I used to see when I was in college. You go to an office and then there's a window, only one window, and it is written, no inquiries. So, of course, yes, you're going to go there because that is the only way you get into this place. It's written no inquiries.
Right. What you'd want to see moving forward in this particular story?
One of the things is that the government and by police, by extension, need to take something seriously. The ability to assess different situations and react either post or pre is very important. The death of somebody like Juma cannot be ignored. I mean, because of whatever role he occupied. So this is something, before you even talk, cannot be determined by your informal contracts, by releasing some bits of information to your informal journalists. You know, it is a sensitive thing, and police must have a comprehensive way of how they are going to deal and release information related to this thing. And in other cases, like for example, even the IBC, the code and whatever chaos at IBC, those are things you can't ignore. Those are things police should be preparing and releasing information in the morning, that guys, there's this, we expect this in town, and take this, not to wait and say we'll tear gas them. You know, we must be in a position to assess the situation and deal accordingly, but we must also move forward increasingly, like Clay said, to release information proactively, depending on the situation and the magnitude of a problem. There's something we can't ignore and just be on the comfort that because we know a few crime reporters here, we'll give them some bits of information and think we have money. This is more than just a few people.
Just a few people. All right, let's look at something else before we wind up, because time is really moving, and this is to do with IEBC. You've just brought it up. And Clay, it's the second demonstration took place on Monday, and have we painted this picture as though it's the opposition that is fighting IEBC, yet we still have other bodies that are, you know?
Yeah, actually, because I think sometimes Raila probably is big, larger than life sometimes. Yes. And if Raila, let's say Raila is coughing there, probably just doing a normal thing like breathing, and floods are killing people on the other side, you'll find more people coming to actually find out, why is Raila coughing? Why is he breathing this way? I mean, you know, so what is happening here is, of course, there are very many institutions which have actually thrown stones at IEBC. There's the church. There's actually, one thing we forget is that even the so-called the government side, the MPs from the government side, or rather the government side actually, which actually they also show some distrust with the IEBC. There's KOTU, you see. But the only thing we tend to see is that we are painting a picture like COD, or rather Raila Odinga, so much so that actually we've gone to the extent of saying, and I've seen some of these commentators, some of the people actually who are responsible for the poor communication in the government, so-called political analysts, saying that, oh, IEBC is Raila's baby, why does he want to kill it now? But without explaining to people like, okay, fine, yes, this is how it was formed and this is how it transformed. So right now, actually, it is no longer his baby per se. But you see, that is the narrative that we're going with. And I think we need to lay down the facts and say, okay, fine, this is the problem with IEBC. Have we even talked to these COD people, or even the church, or even KOTU, and tell us 1, 2, 3. These are the problems that actually, this is the reason we want IEBC out. These are the kind of probably the reforms that we want set up, or that we are actually agitating for. There's a lot of hubris, you know, a lot of we are more into covering the protests and the tear gas than actually
the nitty-gritty.
The nitty-gritty is actually the substance of, okay, fine, does actually even COD or Raila do they have a reason? What are the reasons? You see, so I think also the riots, make news
Victor,
faster and all that.
In terms of changing that notion that it's just the opposition, it's Raila. Of course, like you mentioned, Raila is definitely very vocal on it, and he is one that the media loves to cover for one reason or the other. I guess because he provokes a lot of emotion from all sorts of angles. But how do we make it very clear that this is not just a code thing? It is for the interest of the country.
I think one of the things we need to move as media in Kenya is public interest issues and business. Because right now, news is a product for sale. And everybody, anytime, every editor looking, the first question is, will this sell? It's not, will this inform the public? So as we move, yes, it's business. Yes, the directors want profits. They want, but we must also ask ourselves, when did journalists become media owners and business? Because we need to differentiate public interest and news and news for sale, and that's the question I'm coming to. Nobody, and we have done an analysis actually, which we have shared with IBC just a few months ago, on how media has covered them in the last 3 months. What are the issues? Because we have a media monitoring system, and like you're mentioning, there's no substance that is coming, and why people are saying IBC must go. People are just stuck on individuals. I mean, the court versus the chairman of IBC, and the things have gotten mixed up in the whole thing. You can't even know now why should IBC remain or go at this level, because the issues that people are raising are not coming out. We are stuck on individuals and politics alone.
Yeah, and IBC itself is not doing actually itself a favor by actually coming out to either articulate what's going on, because right now as we speak, IEBC just changed their communications person. Yeah, I mean, we don't, that one also is actually more or less like privileged information. There's been a lot of changes within IEBC internally. It's being treated still as privileged information. So we have to look at, I mean, what are they also hiding? What are these other parties hiding also? Because all these people, nobody wants to come forward. Code 2 shouts from the back, okay, Raila and Code do it from the streets. The other parties and all that, nobody wants.
The issues are lost.
Yeah, the issues are getting lost.
Forward and in concluding,
and even if we, even when we try, like I think this Sunday, we had an extensive coverage of all this. We had an interview with the chairman of IEBC, but you see still that they're always in a hurry. They're not ready to actually call maybe a national forum and say, okay, fine, people, this is our stand. This is what is going on. Those issues, actually the IEBC itself is actually failing to communicate.
Okay. And what that has done is, yes, we have managed to tear gas the protesters, but ask yourself, every Monday those protesters, does any work happen around that office? You know, because you must ask yourself, if 2-3 hours or a whole day is wasted, you know, because IBC must be working. These are people who are paid to be working, people who occupy that region. So that in itself is making it difficult. So we can say, yes, we tear gas the people, they ran away. But what that day, how do you count? How do you justify having paid the people who are supposed to be working when they never work? Okay. So we must ask ourselves hard questions.
In concluding, Bwire, because of time, come Monday, according to court, they've said that they're going to go for the protest. What is it that we should be covering? Is it just the protest, and you know whether our security forces have new gear, you know, that they will display?
I think that will be given a color story, some page, but we need to look at the issues.
The issues.
We move towards what are the issues that are pro or for, what are people raising, what are these matters that would warrant a review of electoral laws, what are the issues, what are IBC saying, what is it that is making people say what they are saying?
Okay.
To me, issues.
Conclusion.
I think the media needs to be the voice of reason here, because I think everybody has lost it. IEBC as a quasi-government body, the government itself as the police, the politicians have lost it. And I think now what we need to do is that all these theatrics about, oh, we have new gear, we tear gas them and all that, it should be color. It should be color. I think we need to come in between here now and actually tell them, like, okay guys, I think you need to stop it. And I mean, tell us what issues there are. Okay, yes, we'll cover it. But we should
need to go deeper than that, than just covering that.
Yeah, because actually I think now that's the only way we can save the whole situation.
Thank you very much, Clay Muganda, who is an editor with The Standard, and Victor Bwire, who is the deputy at Media Council of Kenya. Thank you very much for your discussion and participating this morning. That's where we're going to end Newsroom, and I can see that your comments are coming fast and furious. I'll be reading them as we continue with the show. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we've got some news bulletin for you, but also later on today on Your Health, we'll be looking at your heart and some of the myths and facts. We'd like to separate myths and truth regarding your health. Are slimmer people healthier?
Sawa, tukunywe maji.